welcome to episode 3 of the Old Man and the CV podcast. Thank you for listening, following, and sharing. We have now listeners in over 10 countries. So please keep listening and keep learning, and please keep following and sharing. Thank you. Let's get on with episode 3. We're delighted to be joined by Tristan Heywood for this episode. Tristan has been in the recruitment industry for over 20 years at Oakstone International and also runs a company, Future-Proof Pro, that enables sports professionals to transition into normal life at the end of their sporting careers. Tristan, thank you very much and welcome to the podcast.
It's good to meet you. Thank you for inviting me.
Genuine pleasure. Now, can you tell your listeners a little bit more about what you've done, just to give them some background?
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Oakstone for over 22 years. So we're a technology only. I guess we call us a search agency rather than a recruitment business, and I kind of specify that to say that we're not focused on generally getting people who are unemployed into employment. It's very much a targeted kind of agency consultancy that's focused on commercially facing roles in small to medium software companies, primarily sales and revenue kind of ownership roles for those companies, from senior contributors up to senior leadership.
Our listeners will feel that age is a barrier to the interview process and progressing that interview. Tell us about your experience about educating organisations about the value and the usefulness of the experience that more senior employees bring.
Sure, yeah, and there's a few different ways of kind of articulating that. When I first started, everyone I spoke to from an enterprise sales perspective in the technology industry was probably 40 plus, and the value of using an external sourcing partner, a recruitment firm, would be to go and attract experienced salespeople that you may not be able to get unless you go out and try and, physically approach them to bring them into your organization. A lot of companies didn't want to sit back and just deal with those that applied to the roles. They wanted to kind of go and source the best people. So, so somewhere along the line, that kind of market focus shifted. So companies seem to have taken on this view that the ugly side of the sales job is something that more mature or older salespeople don't want to do, which is a misconception, and it's something that we kind of advise against when we're taking a brief. I think to do it on a case by case basis when we're introducing a shortlist is kind of ineffective. I think it's important to guide our clients through, understanding what it is they want to hire and understanding what characteristics and behaviors are needed for this person to be successful, and ensuring that older salespeople, mature salespeople, experienced salespeople aren't discounted because of the perception of what they might be or might not be willing to do. That fundamentally is one of the biggest challenges that we have to, I think, address early in the process.
Okay, so my question to that would be, how do you help address that with organisations? Because maybe they have a very fixed set of what they're looking for. And you're saying, hang on, don't discard these people because your perception is they are too old. How do you manage that with the organisations yourself?
Yeah, so I think the trick is to really drill into what is the need for the client. What do they need this person to do? What actual fundamental skills and experience is needed for this person to be successful, and how are you going to measure that success? Because there's a big difference to how you even interview. If you're interviewing people based on experience, or you're interviewing people based on behaviors, ultimately, if it's the latter, an interview process can sometimes get a bit convoluted, is the right word. Sometimes it misses the focus of what the needs of the role are. So you can have situations where a company will start to measure a younger salesperson on their achievements and not value their potential, and vice versa.
Yep.
Measure an experienced salesperson on what they think their mentality is or what they think their behaviors are going to be, rather than the things that they've achieved. I think the reality is, depending on your business and the types of buyer that you're selling to and the steps that you go through in your selling process, I think most companies want a bit of both. that they want to hire people with the capability of doing the role and the demonstration that they've done it, but with the right mindset and attitude to it. Age should absolutely not be a factor,
So
but it is.
do you think it's useful then? I mean, we talked about software, we talked about sales and revenue generating roles that you work with. There's a lot of software businesses right now who are trying to scale up real quick, right? That's the nature of the business.
Yeah.
Software as a service, scale it up, sell it off, happy days. And everyone's doing it. Where can you get the value of, say, someone who's worked in a small, fast-growing scale-up, and this other company is in that position, and you almost have to pitch and say, no, this guy has been on that, I hate the word journey, but on that journey for 2, 3, 4 years with this other, and the skills and behaviors you need to be looking at in 2 years' time when you're at your peak for growing is exactly the skills that this guy or lady has got now, as opposed to what you're looking for. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So I think that's a challenging one because, again, it should never be about age, and it should always be about behaviors and about execution. I think the interesting dynamic to this as well. I mean, the market we're in right now is a tight market, for everybody. I think it's fair to say that the software industry in particular hasn't seen anything like this for probably 15 to 20 years. So the other reality you have is that the market conditions are challenging, and some people will struggle because they haven't seen market conditions like this, particularly software salespeople. So I think there's a value in looking at experienced salespeople who've been through this cycle. 2000, 2001 was tough. When I started out doing this, it was challenging. All the startups didn't have any money. A bit like now, it was a difficult time. So a lot of people had to learn to be streetwise to how they were going to get through the tough times and dig in and really focus on not cutting corners and doing the really ugly side of the role. I think the benefit you have with a lot of experienced salespeople is that they've done that before and they know how to drive the right outcomes. I think the mentality of the person's willingness to do the ugly side of the job, because you know that it will bear fruit at the end of the process, shouldn't be about age, or it just should be about the application of that person. There's definitely, I would say, a reassuring component to this in that people have been through these cycles before, adds an extra degree of I think confidence that they know what they're going to be coming into in 2023. It's going to be a challenging year, and I think you can de-risk your hiring to some extent by ensuring you focus on people that have got experience of working with a small company where you haven't got a brand, but also doing what you've got to do to get that brand off the ground, and qualify the person in your process against, have they got the fundamental attitude to do this job, as opposed to, I think they have because they're a certain age, as opposed to, and that goes both ways, a younger salesperson versus an older salesperson.
And do you think there's a difference in hunger and appetite? Because you'd think the logic says when you're young, you've got more energy, you're more hungry, you're more ambitious. Whereas actually, when you get to 40, 45, 50, certainly 50 plus, in your head, you've got everything to prove because you've got, pensions to top up, mortgages to pay off, and you've only got 15, 12, 17 years or whatever it is to do it. Does that bring in more hunger?
It's a good point. I think it depends exclusively on the person. I mean, I think when you're in your 30s and your 40s, you've got more distractions. You don't tend to have those distractions when you're a little bit older. I think there's a lot to be said for a very focused, experienced salesperson who's focusing on, I've got 7 years left selling before I want to consider I wouldn't say retirement, but maybe not put themselves in an aggressive sales environments. The focus on maximizing earning potential in those years is incredibly compelling from a motivational perspective. People who can really focus because they haven't got the time to waste. There is an argument to say that if you're a salesperson earlier in your career, you don't have that same time-based decision making. You think you're going to stay young forever, and we've all thought that at different times, I think. So, and you don't stop to think that actually in 6 years' time, 7 years' time, 8 years' time, I'm not going to be doing this anymore. So I've got to be making X amount of money to have the future that I want to have, and if I'm not making it, then I need to look at the reasons why. But you don't have to question, I don't think, the mentality. The only time that the mentality is an issue is if it's an issue in the person's psyche. That could be I keep saying younger and older. That could be a salesperson in their 30s or 40s who just thinks that they're not willing to do X part of the role because they've never had to do it before. I've been successful in these 3 companies. I didn't have to do that then, so why should I do that now? That is not age specific. That's just a mentality of person.
Yeah, and that's a very, very valid point. Any final thoughts on how some of the more experienced guys can help resonate, especially working with guys like yourself, to make sure that they are getting to the top of that interview and application pool?
That's a good question. It's a really difficult one to answer quickly. But I think that I think that addressing the issue head on, I'm a big believer in being very transparent about the unspoken things that can be a barrier to securing the right role. So just approaching it with a different perspective. Your behaviors will dictate that, but also I think highlighting in your profile. I'm an experienced salesperson. I've been in, when I was at X company, this was the landscape of the company. This is what I joined. This is what I had to do to be successful. Sometimes people can assume that everyone knows that X company was successful in these years, but before it was successful, it was a startup. Not every company is immediately successful. So you've had to, I think, demonstrating that you have been able to consistently generate success and that your attitude isn't diminished in the needs to be able to do that, I think it's important. And that's I think addressing it head on and not allowing perception to overrule that, I think, is a very important factor.
And that is an absolutely brilliant way to end this. Thank you. Tristan, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And your contributions are very valuable and valid. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's all we've got time for this week, I'm afraid. And like last week, we're having to drop the dead donkey, but we will get them in eventually. Thank you again to Tristan. You can find Tristan Heywood on LinkedIn or look for Oakstone International. Next week, our guest will be Paul Sanderson, MBE, who will be taking a slightly different track, and we will be talking about mental well-being. So the few credits before we go: for the music and the events, Abigail, Eva, Molly Wong. This is an Almost Pro production for 23 Magic, copyright 2023. See you next week, Santiago amigos.